Hello, and welcome to Into the Afroverse. I'm your host, William Jones, and this is the show where we talk about the future of Black people, not only in the United States, but across the globe. Today, we are joined by Dr. Claire Nelson. Dr. Nelson is a lead futurist for the Futures Forum, an advisory practice specializing in strategic foresight and sustainability engineering. She's also a CEO of a startup in the clean energy and space economy and author of The Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, a paradigm shift for achieving global sustainability. She is a Renaissance woman who was named among Forbes' top 50 female futurists and has been honored as a White House champion of change. So without further ado, let's bring on Dr. Nelson. Hello, Dr. Nelson.
Hello, greetings and salutations. William Jones, how are you?
I'm doing well. So excited to have you here today. In keeping with the theme of Afrofuturism, I thought who better to bring on than an actual futurist. What else would you like to tell us about yourself?
Well, I think there's not much to add. I mean, I am probably most proud right now of my book, Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, a paradigm shift for achieving global sustainability, because I'm hoping that that book will become sort of a Bible, if you will, for people who really want to design a different future into being.
Excellent. So today I want to kind of talk about, we're just coming out of what many look at or what is recognized as the anniversary of American independence, July 4th. Today, I just wanted to really talk about, in terms of Black people in the United States, and if not the world, what will our future look like in terms of our moves for true independence, our moves for achieving what many folks deem the American dream? That's what I want to talk to you about today. So let's start off with that. In your opinion, what is this American dream that Black folk are trying to achieve, and what will that look like moving forward in the future?
Well, that's a question that I actually spent a lot of time thinking about. First of all, let me say that the American dream was written for not necessarily Black people to aspire to, but certainly is the, let's say, the underlying shared vision of most people's blueprint. And that American dream actually has been shared by every immigrant, including myself, that comes to America in search of this better future. It's shared by those from the American South that moved away from the slave plantations to the North, looking for work and a better life. Now come to find that in the North of America, the endemic poverty and generational exclusion and inequality continues. Now, the American dream was also in a time when perhaps the world was different and America was the sole superpower, and certainly the world did not have the global challenges we face today. And so this American dream of, I guess a White House with a picket fence, 2.5 children and a dog, with Opie or whoever playing nice in the background, certainly I think is a thing of the past. And what needs to happen is a new American dream. And that is what we see being played out right now in the, let's say, very heated and basically confrontational between the two major parties, the blues and the reds, so to speak. Then we have the purples in terms of the Green Party and the Worker Party and all the other parties that kind of make up the purpose, as far as I call them. But what really needs to happen is probably a new dream really has to be emerge that is based on the reality that the world cannot consume resources at the pace of which America has taught us to consume resources. There's just not enough to go around. Yes, we have the abundance theory of change, hence the race for space, but right now we're drowning in our overconsumption, waste, excess. And so the question for me, as a Black woman from the global South origin, I came here from Jamaica, is do Black Americans, and by Black Americans, I mean all of us in America, not just those who, quote unquote, were born of grandparents or great grandparents who were enslaved in America, do Black America, or does Black America, as opposed to Black Americans, does Black America really want to formulate a future based on the economic and social contracts of the past? And that's the question that I've been asking many people since 2014, I believe, when I started having this conversation with Black people who I consider influencers in various spaces.
Okay, thank you. And what moved you to these types of questions and this type of research? In your background, what kind of led you on this path to where you are now?
Well, my life has been spent in the economic development space. I worked at one of the most prestigious global international organizations in the Washington, D.C. area. And I found myself as a minority in that space, very much, on the outside often of the table. I was usually the only Black person in the room, and usually my opinions were not considered. And so, as somebody who decided to take up arms within the institution, I became known as a troublemaker, heretic, outlaw. I mean, I was everything that was not good form for a bureaucrat, right?
Right.
I started my own one-woman tribe called Ohoto Clan, right, of outlaws, heretics, outliers, troublemakers, and unreasonable people, and really demanded that they look at how they were working in Latin America and move towards a development with equity. And the more I thought about it, I realized that Black America is, for me, like a third world nation in a nation. That's the first construct. Yes, Black America may be the wealthiest Black population in the world, supposedly with the greatest consumption power. But again, what do we use it to do? Buy shoes, brand name clothes that we don't own, what I mean? Right. Logo brands that we don't have any shares in. So we are sort of like a global South ourselves in this northern country. And so it really began to bother me that those of us who are working in this global space, the World Bank Development, AID, were busy trying to develop, people around the world, but we weren't really turning those same skill sets to look at with a different lens of the condition of Black people in America. So I really started to get engaged and say, well, I should take some of those skills I've learned and apply them to the Black American condition. If indeed this what we sometimes call the Joseph tribe, right? The tribe that was sold into slavery is now being asked by Africa to come back, return home, and give what we can and invest what we can to create a different future for Africa. And so this is what led me to this conversation on the future of the American dream, not just for Black America, but for all Americans. And this idea that there needs to be a Black Futures Commission, right, that looks out to the year 2065, at the minimum 200 years post Juneteenth. What does America look like in 2065 that then will inform the reparations conversation, which to me right now is quite shallow, very shallow. And that's why I do not consider myself an adherent of the call for reparations, because it's built on the premise that the Black situation is similar to the Jews and the Japanese. And I say, hell no, I'm sorry. Right. What we have gone through is much worse than any of those things.
Thank you. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones, and we are joined by Dr. Claire Nelson. Okay, Dr. Nelson, you mentioned reparations and this distinction between what Black people have experienced in other groups. For those that are arguing in favor of it and they're using these other groups as an example as to why reparations would be needed and justified for Black folk, how do you address that question?
The first question I ask them is, what does the future of a repaired America look like post a reparations agenda? If they can't answer that question, then don't come to me with any arguments. Because if you don't have a clear vision of what this decolonized future is going to look like, basically to me, you're just selling your ancestors' suffering for 30 pieces of silver. We have had to reinvent ourselves as a people. We've had our culture stripped. We have had our dignity stripped. I mean, yes, Japanese were in terror, their dignity was stripped, but it wasn't stripped that they lost their culture, their language, their names, right? We lost our names, we lost our history, we lost Even our religion was told that we were like all evil, Satan worshiping, cannibalistic, stupid people. We had 400 years of that indoctrination. And so how can you possibly have a reparations agenda that is focused on about money to buy housing or equitable housing, etc.? It does not make sense. I think that Americans of African descent, and I use Americans because whether we're in Canada or the US or in Jamaica or in Brazil, we have basically, we're basically like a new tribe, if you will, of people. Number one, because we may be predominantly African descent, but we show up physically with different phenotypes, right? Mm-hmm. So we represent, to me, the potential of the future of humanity, which you must first understand. It is us who have the soul of the future in our hands, I believe. And so we have a responsibility to have a reparatory agenda that goes beyond just, the money for lost wages and to be equal to the rest of America, etc. What does that mean if we're going to be drowning in cities that are underwater in 30 years?
Right. Excellent. So let me get to your book, because I think you're addressing, some of these issues and so forth are coming up in your book as well. Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, a paradigm shift for achieving global sustainability. Can you give us some insight into what this book is about and how you're addressing and dealing with this issue of Black people in the future?
Well, the book is really written for everybody. It's not written for Black people, but because I'm a Black woman writing the book, I had to first talk about how we get to this sorry state. The fact is, we get to this sorry state because we live in a capitalist economy that's global, that is built on the African slave trade as a major, if not the primary, platform on which our current world economy was built, right? And so the book starts there and takes us through some of the challenges we face today in terms of species history. Our species now being a planetary species. We're about to become a spacefaring species, yet we have the same limiting beliefs about who we are and who we must become. And so the book takes us through a design principle I call the Smart Futures Framework, because I'm saying if we all walk around with a smartphone and we talk about smart cities, but it's only about the technology being smart, but we ourselves as humans remain silly, stupid, or whatever other words you want to use, then what are we really trying to accomplish? We need to get off of this bandwagon that everything that's shiny and bright and technically, advanced is really advances us as a species, is really advancing the well-being of humanity. And so the book talks about these design principles where we ask 5 questions. That's the acronym of those questions, spell out the word SMART. So whether you're designing a product, a process, a project, a policy, a program, a plan, you should be asking the question, is this a sustainable system? S. M, what is the metric for success? Is it really a moral metric? Is it meaningful to humanity's well-being? A, who are the agents in the system? Is everybody at the table? Are we taking into account the aspirations of those people living, as well as living nature, which is also an agent in the system, right? R, how are we designing for resilience? And T, how are we using technology in a transformational way to arrive at this flourishing future that is where we're sustainable, we're living in harmony, we're living in balance, and we're not hurling further over the cliff of our own self-destruction. And so the book talks about this thinking style to be indoctrinated. So every time we hear the word smart, we should be thinking about these 5 questions. And then I wrap the book in a story that is carried by Anansi. And so that's, I think, what makes my book very different. I have stories from the future where Anansi, as the human / God / of our Akan people, is the storyteller that helps us see what might the world look like if we have achieved this paradigm shift. And Nancy goes as far as 3,000 to gather stories and to see what might humanity look like. And I put Anansi in the forefront of that because, again, my theory of change is that there's so much we can get from the past, the Sankofa principle, to go back from the past, learn what we must learn, and then tweak what is to create this new decolonized vision of ourselves going forward.
Okay, so you've mentioned West African culture,
Yes.
Sankofa, Anansi. What do you see in terms of cooperation between Black people in the United States? You mentioned Black folks in the Caribbean, South America, Canada, and the African continent. How do we as a people begin to work together even more so? Because as of late, especially, social media, there's a lot of conversation around what I am seeing as greater division between groups within the Black community based upon, points of origin in terms of, where we got our start, so to speak. How do you look at bringing Black folk together despite these geographical boundaries?
Well, first of all, in the American context, I do think we need to have um, uh, a kumbaya moment, so to speak,
Mhm.
where we have a sacred space for conversation about the beliefs that divide us and the beliefs that unite us. I do think that we're long overdue for that conversation to be held in private. I say in private and sacred space because there's lots of wounds that need to be healed, right? We can't gloss over the reality that we have been told things about each other. Many of us have come here, and I don't count myself in that group, but many of us have come here with preconceived ideas about Black America, having been fed a steady diet of Hollywood movies that paint American Blacks in a particular construct. And so many naive and I would say undereducated and unknowing people come as Black immigrants with this assumption of who Black America is because they have not done the homework to recognize how much has been done to bring us to the space where we now benefit from some of the labor of the greats. And I must say, among the greats of the past included immigrants from the Caribbean or the West Indies, as we're then known, whether it is John Russwurm, who co-authored, co-executed the first Black newspaper, or a Marcus Garvey that led one of the biggest rights movements in the world out of New York, right? So we certainly from the American history side, Caribbean Western side, have probably a much greater understanding of what it means to be Black and formerly enslaved than, say, Black immigrants from Nigeria who don't really understand that construct. They don't really have that embedded in their memory, right? I have it because I come from Jamaica. And so we have to have this conversation. Then, and a lot of Africans hate when I say this, why did you participate in selling us into slavery? Not you personally, but some of your people. And don't tell me. And yes, I know now because I've done the work that there was resistance on the African continent, but you were outgunned and outsmarted because you had your own inter-tribal wars that were then used against each other. And so how do we then, knowing this, learn from that past, right? So we then heal whatever divides us right now to take our rightful place, as Garvey would say, among the nations of the world that are indeed powerful and are indeed great.
Okay, once again, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones, on WOL, where information is power. And we're joined by Dr. Claire Nelson. And I can tell you right now, based on this conversation, Dr. Nelson, I would love to have you back. Okay. and with that, and with that being said, how can folks contact you and how can we get your book?
Well, my book is on Amazon, Smart Futures book, a bit.ly link, but Amazon, if you go Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, and of course, my website for my organization, thefuturesforum.org. If you go to that platform, you'll find out more about me, the work we're trying to do. It's a not 501c3 nonprofit. We're trying to basically bring futures literacy to Black communities. I'm very plugged into Morgan State University in particular, and trying to build out a sustainable futures lab there as an entry point. So really looking for people who have like minds, who are engineers, who are artists, who can really help us find a place. I do believe that Morgan State is a great place to be because we have such a dynamic president who's trying to really push the university to be a leader, not just in America, but globally. So yeah, thefuturesforum.org is where you can find me and my book and links to other things that I'm working on.
Okay. And in terms of building this new future that you're talking about, what role do you see yourself having in creating this future? And let's say you can wave a magic wand. What is this future going to look like?
Well, read my book and you see all the different variations of the future according to the gospel of Claire Nelson. But certainly myself, by attaching myself to a school like Morgan State, I realized that a small NGO practice could not really create the institutional linkages we need. And so the opportunity came up for me to partner with Morgan State, and I'm really excited about the space lab that we're developing there and the partnerships we're doing through the global practice that Morgan is putting in place that will be launched in the fall. It's a global innovation and learning institute that they'll be doing online, so we can reach people across the country and across the world. And I'll be teaching foresight there. That's one thing. And you'll be able to get CEUs or unit, etc. Out of that. We also, I'm also hoping that through that work, we can begin to work with Black elected officials in Maryland to talk about a Black Futures Commission in Maryland, right? A Sustainable Futures for Maryland, in which we have a equitable futures, and it doesn't have to be a Black futures, but the whole issue of equity, right? Sustainable Futures Commission, in which equity is on the table, equity around race and gender and all the other things are front and center. Because sometimes if you make it Black, it won't happen. So you have to think about, again, we're trying to change the whole America, except we're doing it with a lens of an African descendant lens. And I think sometimes, rather than trying to be separate and apart, there's a benefit to partnering with allies so everybody moves at the same time. But as long as we're at the table and we have to construct the table, I don't want us to be invited to the table and then you tell me the rules and I have to follow along with your rules. That's not going to work for me. I've proven it wouldn't work for me because I did it where I worked before. And I said, no, your rules can't work for us in Latin America. We're going to change the rules so that Black communities in Brazil and Argentina, in fact, that's why I got the White House Champion of Change. I was able to connect Black people from Argentina to Canada through the work I did with these grassroots communities. So now we're at a new space. We have climate change, we have pandemics to worry about, we have runaway AI to worry about, we have uncontrollable new genetic modified organisms, artificial synthetic biology. There's so many things that could go wrong, right? We have to have a futures capacity in a university that is focused on our survival and thrival, so we can help write those rules, not just follow the rules, but we can help write the rules to ensure that humanity goes back to the lessons that we learned from our indigenous brothers and sisters, that the earth does not belong to us. The cosmos do not belong to us. We belong to the earth. And that's what I hope that the reparations movement can bring into the conversation, not just about the money, but how do we change our mindset to ensure that we as a species do not self-destruct?
Wow. Thank you. And I can always tell when you're having a great conversation because the time moves so quickly. So we're coming up against it. We're coming up against the close, but I did want to get one more thought from you. What's your biggest concern about the future for Black folk, and how do we avoid it, or how do we remedy that concern?
My biggest concern is that I'm not going to have enough allies who see the value in what I'm saying to reach what I call the 10% of us that will take this forward. There is a scientific number called Dunbar's number as well, which is about 150 people. So I'm trying to grow my tribe to 150, because once I have my tribe of 150, I believe we can make it happen. So my biggest concern is not finding the other 149 people who see my vision and want to work from wherever they are, but working together in concert to shape the future we want.
Okay, and one more time, how can people reach you?
thefuturesforum.org. The Futures Forum with an M.org.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Clara Nelson, I want to let you know that I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, based on some of the things you talked about, when I heard runaway AI, I was like, oh, we got to talk more about that. So I definitely will have you back on. I'm sure folks that are listening would love to have you back on. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I'm just so happy that this show exists. For years, I've been dreaming that a platform would exist where we could talk about the future we want. We could begin to infiltrate in people's mindset that we have the opportunity to shape the future of humanity, not just of Black folk, to shape the future of humanity. And we should live on the foundations left by Shirley Chisholm and Harriet Tubman and Marcus Garvey to really do our part at this point in human history.
Excellent. Thank you once again. And that does it for today. This is William Jones, your host for Into the Afroverse, where we're taking Black folks into the future. So once again, you can join us Tuesdays, 10 a.m. to 10:30 right here on WOL, where information is power. And a special thank you to our production team over at Mr. Duke Productions. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Have a great day.
Thank you.